Welcome to Insatiable, the podcast where we discuss the intersection of food, psychology, and culture.
I was fascinated by getting older to a point, like I was always like, ooh, gerontology sounds cool. But God, I don't want to end up in a nursing home. I don't want to do nursing home care. So it just came out of like, I don't want to age like my mom. I don't want to age like society. And I got to help other people not to do that too.
I'm your host, Ali Shapiro, an integrated health coach, 32-year and counting cancer survivor, and have radically healed my relationship with food and my body. And for the past 17 years, I've been working with clients individually, in group programs, and in company settings to do the same. Welcome. The information in this podcast should not be considered personal, individual, or medical advice. As a cancer survivor, I have always felt like aging is a privilege. And as I am in my mid-40s now and really reckon with what is aging, aside from just being grateful to be here, when I open my Instagram account, it is a shit show out there. Some people telling you, don't lift weights, slow down, worry about breaking bones, right? So they're kind of catastrophizing aging and saying certain things are inevitable. Or you get this fantasy selling you these solutions that aren't really going to deliver. So where is the truth? It's always somewhere in the middle, right? And so that's why I wanted to have Dr. Jannine Krause on today. I was actually invited onto her show. And as we were talking, I was like, this woman really knows her stuff. And she's not out here selling people a bunch of stuff they don't need. Telling you the functional medicine space, the aging space, all 90% a waste of money. And what we talk about today with Dr. Krause, which I love, are some of the free, simple things you can start to do to support your body as you age. So you don't have to go downhill like is often the default expectation. But also, how do you focus on your health and not just vanity? And I'm not saying vanity is a bad thing. I'm just saying a lot of the stuff in the anti-aging space is about vanity and not actually making your body healthy. So we're going to talk about that today and how our relationship to food changes because of some of the physiological stuff happening, that if we know it's happening, we can make some small but profound tweaks that help us feel more satisfied from our food, help us have less cravings, and to prevent the snowball that can happen with downhill of health problems if we don't take care of the foundational stuff. So we're going to get into that today. Before we do, two things I want to let you know about. I am running my Why Am I Eating This Now live group program this September. It is an amazing program if you're interested in consistency, staying on track, and really addressing the root of your emotional eating triggers. And if you're even curious what those triggers are and why they make sense, rather than something that you have to fight and try to fix, but rather understand and work through, right? The same way that I was diagnosed with irritable bowel syndrome, the solution wasn't more antacids, which is what I was told, or a very restrictive diet, which I was told. No, the solution was addressing my gut health, which had a completely different orientation and approach. And so this is not about trying to white knuckle with more rules around food, have it in your house, don't have it in your house. No. We're getting to the root, which has really little to do with food. So if you're interested in that, I hope you will join. I have a free masterclass for you to really get a sense of the program, identify your triggers, and see if this is right for you, and get to meet the type of women who show up to these groups, because these groups, I'm telling you, the biggest feedback I get from my programs is that these groups are life-changing. And when we're working through this really tender, really complex stuff, it really helps to have a group of people doing it with you. So I'm offering a free masterclass on Tuesday, September 10th, and it's called Untangle Your Food Triggers, Catch Yourself Before You Fall Off Track. You can register with the link in the show notes to this podcast episode, or you can visit my website at alishapiro.com. Either way, you'll see info there to sign up. And if you've been to any of my classes, you've been to any of the community gatherings, you know that this is 90% value, 10% sales, right? A lot of these webinars you show up to, it's 90% sales, 10% content. No. I don't roll that way. I trust that if you come to this and you feel like, wow, I got a lot of clarity, I got a lot of awareness, that if it's right for you, then you'll know. I don't do fear and scarcity tactics. So come get some clarity. Let's get momentum and let's harness these back to school vibes and help you really improve your relationship to food and stay more consistent. The next thing is, if you remember, I have had a goal to reach 200 podcast reviews by the end of summer, which even though it's August and it feels like we're winding down here, we still have a month to go. And I'm at 191 reviews. So close. So if you've loved the show, benefited from the show, and haven't left a review, I'd really appreciate if you could take 30 seconds, a minute if you actually write something on Apple Podcasts and leave a review. It really helps me because it helps the show reach more people and more people find the show. Okay. So we're 9 reviews away. We can do this. We can do this. And I just want to share one of the most recent reviews from Juicy Fruit to Cute Bra. These names are incredible, y'all. But she says, a favorite listen. This podcast is on my favorites list, and I recommended it to my sister and girlfriends. Allie has great guests and content. I love how she addresses food and eating in such a holistic way, including body, mind, heart, and soul pieces of the complex, interconnected puzzle. She is so wise and non-judgmental and has helped me bring compassion to my own struggles and stories with food in my body. Thanks for the awesome podcast, Allie. And thanks for the review. I appreciate it. All right. Before we get to the show, I just want to tell you a little bit more about Dr. Jannine Krause. She's a naturopathic doctor, an acupuncturist, and host of the Health Fix podcast, where she specializes in helping women over 40 not age like their mothers or according to society's expectations. She has a doctorate in naturopathic medicine, a master's in acupuncture, and a bachelor's in biology. And her work has been featured all over, including Authority Magazine, Naturopathic Doctor News and Reviews, True Health with Ashley James podcast, the Gutsy Health podcast, and the Less Stressed Life podcast. I think you're really going to enjoy Jannine and today's show. Jannine, thank you so much for joining us today. I love talking to naturopathic physicians because, one, you have an incredible wealth of information, but also you're kind of renegades. Like, it takes a lot of chutzpah to like be like, I'm going to go to medical school, but I'm going to do it in a way that actually to me makes sense. not that traditional medical school doesn't make sense, but it's around prevention and all that stuff. So thank you for joining us today to talk about aging and food and all the things. So thanks for being here.
My pleasure, Allie. It's going to be a fun one. Looking forward to it.
So before we get started, I am curious about your story and how you, again, decided to get into naturopathic medicine. Because for listeners, I've talked about this when we've had a few other naturopaths on. You have to go to medical school, plus you have to study nutrition and really a lot of preventative medicine. So I'm always curious how people who, and there's not a clear career path for you, right? So what made you get into naturopathic medicine?
You know, ultimately, it was a combination of my mom having cancer and seeing her, going to naturopath, seeing her go to acupuncture. And the truth is, it was her acupuncturist that really got me in. I was 15 years old, taking my mom to her appointments because I wanted my driver's permit, basically. I didn't, acupuncture, whatever, they do weird things there, Midwest kid, just like, yeah, whatever. I want to be a pro snowboarder. I don't really care. But I went in to the visit one day because I was watching people go in there and they're like hunched over and they're gray and they look kind of like death, right? And I'm like, oh, that's weird. And then they come out and they're like bright colored. They're happy. They look like they're walking on clouds. And I'm like, what kind of weird stuff's going on in there? And so, for a 15-year-old, I'm like rocking out, to my grunge music in the car, thinking it's like best thing ever because I can jam in my mom's car while she's getting an appointment. But at the same time, I was like, there's something going on in there. So I went in and her doc was like, saw that I was excited and was like, what's this for? What's that for? Why do you use this? I was just asking tons of questions and probably ad nauseum, but he loved it and took me around. And so literally throughout the course of my mom's 10-year battle with breast cancer, which God, poor gal, She ended up passing in the end. Totally just insane. But I think she did have a pretty good quality of life for those 10 years of like constant remissions. But the doc just showed me so much and so many things you could do. And I was like, wow, this is really awesome. And then I was talking to her naturopaths too and being like, oh, wow, this is cool. You guys got a lot of toolbox stuff. And I was like, all right. But at the time I was still like, I should probably look at conventional medicine. Did some shadowing of medical doctors. And I was like, that's all the tools you got? What about needles? What about energy? What about like homeopathics? And they're like, what's that? So anyway, I was like, well, the answer is clear. I need more tools. I want to practice the way I want to. Yes, I've always been a little bit of a push the envelope, don't do things normal, or like as everyone else, I guess you could say I'm not a normie. So that's what happened. And I just ended up one day, I was like, oh crap, I'm a naturopath. Here we go.
How did I end up here?
What happened to snowboarding? Gosh, I still snowboard and ski. But yeah, I learned that was not going to be my future.
Yeah. I love that framing of like, you have more tools at your disposal. Like, cause I think that's, we're living in very polarized times and it's like, it's this or that. And it's like, but what if it's all of it and it's the right tool at the right time and you are equipped to offer so much broader tools. So I love that. It's like, yeah, I want options. I love options just in general. So, and so then how did you really focus then in on aging and specifically perimenopause, menopause? Because that is even more complex. Because right, if you learn more tools, you have to learn more complexity. And then, right, big reason women aren't part of a lot of studies up until what? The early 90s, 2000s is because we have a more complex system because of our cycle. So what made you think of wanting to get into women and supporting them as they age?
It's funny. I started getting older and I was like, oh, I got to do something about some of these things, because when you're younger, you think you're going to live forever. It doesn't really matter, and of course I watched my mom, right, go through the whole process. My mom was older when I was born. She was 38. And when she died, she was 62. And so I saw her getting older fast. And I saw like the trajectory of like what the 80s and 90s diet culture did to her. And I honestly got to a point where I was like, oh shit, I don't want to age like my mom. I don't want to get older like her. I don't want to get older like the rest of the females in my family. Everybody was obese. Everybody had some kind of illness or cancer. Both my mom and aunt died of breast cancer within 6 months of each other. Like, how crazy is that? And so I looked at that and was like, I don't want that. I don't want that. And just watching my mom go through the whole process of cancer and at one point having blisters like this big on her body and we're like popping it in the shower. I'm like, oh, hell no. I'm not going there. So that's what started it. And then of course my patients are getting older. And I was like, I need to stay on top of this. I need to know what bioidentical hormone replacement is. I need to know what happens when you get older. Because I was fascinated by getting older to a point. Like I was always like, ooh, gerontology sounds cool. But the traditional sense of it was like, oh my God, I don't want to end up in a nursing home. I don't want to do nursing home care. My mom was a nurse as the plot thickens. And she worked in a nursing home for many years. And I would go visit her there with my dad because she was working nights. And I was like, oh God, I don't want this either. So it just came out of like, I don't want to age like my mom. I don't want to age like society. And I got to help other people not to do that too.
There's this nuance of like, you are going to get older and there are certain limits. And I want to talk about how that interplays with our food struggles, like talking about how sugar, all this stuff. And you don't have to age like our parents did, or like we see a lot of people, my husband used to work for AARP and they were saying that the new thing is like, I'm healthy, except I have 2-3 diagnoses, right? I'm healthy except for type 2 diabetes. I had a heart attack and, something, whatever. And again, this is not that everything is in our control. You and I, both having experienced cancer in very intimate ways, get that there's many inputs into things. However, it's just fascinating to me that we've normalized, I'm healthy except for these like 3 chronic conditions I have. There is some control that we have over aging. And I want to talk about some of that today because I think control gets a bad rap in the food space. It's like, oh, you're just trying for control. And I'm like, but we have some control. So I'm going to use it.
I heard someone say that word's like a negative connotation, but like really it's a word. You give it meaning. But really, yeah, we have to have some control. We have control over how we age. We have control of what we eat. my big thing is like, don't give up your control. And that's kind of what I keep seeing with themes on TV and every other commercial being a pharmaceutical commercial and looking for solutions outside of you. Like, no. Let's bring it back here. You have solutions within you, people. We can do this.
Oh my God, I've been watching the Olympics, not a lot because, I have a kid, but I have been watching like network TV, which I don't normally do. And I've been laughing at how like Eli Lilly, which I guess they've rebranded Lilly. And it's like in the midst of these like peak athletic, like experiences and like all this stuff. And I just can't believe how many pharmaceutical commercials there are. Like, I'm like, oh my God, do they own the networks? Like, I know they own them in the sense that they're their major advertisers, but I'm like, did they just take over the network? Like, I don't know.
It seems as if.
It's been kind of shocking. I'm like, oh, all right. So one of the big things that happens, especially in perimenopause and menopause, because of weight gain, but also because of how we've been treating ourselves up until then, there's almost a reckoning, I think, in our 40s, 50s, 60s. We have listeners of the majority are 35 and older. And they've shown that a lot of people's disordered eating comes back during this time. And women really struggle with body image because you are losing some of that youth privilege that maybe you didn't even know you had. That's kind of been shocking to me. I'm like, I don't care about aging. And then it's like, oh, you lose some of that privilege you didn't even realize, you had physically and in society. So what do you see in your practice? How do you see aging contribute to food struggles with your clients?
Oh my gosh. Well, like you said, most women, I can't imagine there's very few women that don't see their body changing slightly and being like, oh God, and yes, it goes back to like, I need to go back to that 20-year-old body and I'll see it all the time where it's like, all right, I'm going to start food restricting. I'm going to start exercising more. That's the first, right? And then because of the 80s and 90s brainwashing of low fat, it goes to, I'm going to cut out all fat. And then it goes to, and then I'm going to cut out carbs. But I don't eat much protein. So at the end of the day, like, what are you eating? Nothing. So I see that all the time where there's confusion as to, do I do macros? Do I do this, do that? And it's all over the board.
It's interesting that the default is restriction, but how does that backfire? Because now when you're going through perimenopause, menopause, you become cortisol dominant, right? They're sympathetic drive dominant, right? So you have to factor in that that's a stress on the body that you didn't have beforehand. And then often in our 40s and 50s, peak caregiving, the peak of our, careers are often, we have the most responsibilities. And then you throw in just, how rapidly life changes today. How does that restriction actually backfire in a way that maybe we could get away with it in our 20s, early 20s, even your teenage years where you didn't have a mortgage, you didn't have kids. Can you talk about that? Why restriction backfires now? I mean, for lots of reasons, but just extreme calorie deficit in and of itself is not the way to go right now.
The biggest thing, if we're looking at food, right, we're looking at cortisol and it's a stress to the body. So the body thinks like, I am not ever going to get food again. So it starts to have some issues in terms of, stress on the gut. So we'll have microbiome imbalances. We can have leaky gut. We also have a big stress on the liver. Not many people are talking about metabolic fatty liver disease. It's kind of my own-ish term. The conventional world's going to call it non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. This is a big issue in women. I've seen more towards perimenopause, there's an end of perimenopause, upper 40s into 50s and beyond, where we're starting to have the body change, where the belly fat's putting on there. We're getting that. We're getting more of like, let's put it this way, difficulties with the gut, whether it's constipation, diarrhea, it could be it looks like IBS. But we're having all of those different issues. And so what happens, we go back to restriction, right? Because we're like, well, if I don't eat anything, I'm not going to poop. I'm not going to have diarrhea, right? So that's one thought process. Or the other side of it is if you have constipation, now you're going to think of like all the different fiber and things you can load yourself up with. And that messes with the gut too. So ultimately, the impact of restriction on the gut can be imbalanced blood sugar, because what'll happen too, and I've seen this because I've got the Lumen in my office. Have you heard of the Lumen, the breath sensing device with carbon dioxide?
No.
Okay. So it tells you what's going on with your metabolism in terms of, are you off-putting a excess amount of carbon dioxide that would go with, carb burn, or would you be in a fat burn state where it's less carbon dioxide off-put? And so what we'll see is a lot of women are fasting and they're like blowing on this device. They haven't eaten anything that day. And it looks like they're in full carb burn. which makes no sense because they haven't had any carbs. So what's happening is their body's dumping the muscle glycogen out, creating carbs into the bloodstream. And now we're ending up with insulin resistance because of prolonged fasting. And yeah, people have talked about the fasting being a hot thing. Got to do it. Everybody should be on the bandwagon, but now we have issues with that. So I'll start to see that. I've kind of went in multiple directions. The fatty liver goes along with that. In fact, in myself, I think I started to create a fatty liver situation from fasting too much. And that's a whole nother thing. I'm 46. So, I see a lot of this in myself too. So I'm kind of an N of 1 too. I'm also following that pattern. But the other side of this is like gut microbiome imbalances because of like, I'm eating only keto. I'm eating only this. We're all over the dang place. And now we're shifting the gut bugs pretty fast and then add stress, leaky gut on top of it. And we've got a whole mess going on with how our body metabolizes food.
So what I'm hearing you say, and again, if I'm thinking of a lot of people in my audience, they do want to lose weight in a healthy way, right? And I'm someone who's just lost almost 30 pounds. I mean, it took me 3.5 years. It's like slow, because I didn't understand what was happening to my body in these physiological changes. But it sounds like if you do want to lose weight, like cutting back calories should be the last thing. Like if there's a sequence, right? I always say sequence over strategy. There's all these tools, but the first thing you need to do is actually create physical safety in your body by giving like microbiome stuff, right? You actually support your microbiome by adding more variety of foods and not taking out carbs, not going keto, right? All this stuff. Like it's actually adding this stuff in so that your body can support your liver to detox. It can support your gut microbiome, but it's really making sure that you're physically sound before you start cut. And would you even say with cutting calories, it like I have found, and this is my own experience, because of the stress, because I have a full plate, I love my life, right? But there's a lot that's going on. I have a toddler. I run a business. My husband was laid off, right? Like my parents are aging and they have some issues and all this stuff. It's like I found that I could only really cut like 250 calories a day max. Otherwise, I would wake up starving. And I was like, I'm not willing to sacrifice sleep because that's important. So I just have to trust that I can go slower with this. But again, I also have all the foundations down, but I lost 10 pounds just by like strength training and not changing my diet. And then I lost another 10 pounds by like, okay, let me get my protein right, all of this kind of stuff. So, and actually I had to eat more carbs to ensure that I slept. But I found that like the restriction you're talking about, it took me almost 2.5 years to get there. And I was still losing weight in the process, but it's still a lot of stress on my body. So I have to go slow and low. I just think that's going to be what people are asking. Like, but you do need to restrict to lose weight. And it's like, yeah, and in a proper sequence.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah. You got to figure it out first. Now, I would say neurologically too, like getting in touch with someone like you, working with someone like you so that, we've got the mind right around the food. Because we're all programmed, right? Default. Like I said, restrict, work out more if that's your thing, go on, find some diet and try to like do some crash diet, whether, it's the old cabbage soup diet, whatever it may be. Like I've done them all. I have a very wacky history with food too. But the same thing, like you're saying, it's a slow process. And that's the thing that nobody wants to hear because they see on social media, I drank this juice and I lost 20 pounds in 3 days. Yeah. Okay.
But to your point, what are you dumping into your system now that you have to clean up? Like, I mean, I think it gets harder to lose weight, a lot of people can lose weight, but not keep it off. So that's a different question, right? That people need to be asking. The other thing I'm curious about, I mean, there's a lot of things that I want to ask you about is I think with aging and if you don't have all these systems right, I want to talk about sugar cravings because one thing that I've realized, and I am relatively healthy person, right? Like for decades, I've had a truce with food. So I've consistently just been kind of boring with my food, right? Like eating what I need to, not anything, measuring, not restricting. But I have found since going through menopause that my satiety, because from the lack of estrogen, like I have to get my protein right. Whereas when I started tracking my food to lose weight 2 years into my process, or no, maybe it was a year. It was when I was working with my sleep coach because she was like, you have to get enough protein. I was like, oh, I'm eating keto. I'm not really eating keto but like I just was eating so much fat and so little protein, but I could get away with that prior to menopause. Like I was just like, I thought I was getting enough protein, all this stuff, it didn't bother me. But now if I don't get my protein or my carbs, I am still hungry. So what happens when we lose estrogen that contributes to not feeling as satisfied from food? And then why does sugar become harder as we age is kind of two-part questions because of what's happening underneath.
Sure. With estrogen, I think part of it has to do with how we digest food, just in general, and our gut lining health. Because what I hear from a lot of women and why fat seems, yes, there's the keto phase, and a lot of us have gone low carb and kind of ran towards keto. I myself am guilty because I'm part squirrel. I love nuts. It happens. But I think the other side of it, though, is having less digestive enzymes, and in particular, hydrochloric acid being produced. And what I see happening with a lot of women is less hydrochloric production. And then we end up with not being able to tolerate protein as well. So it sits kind of like a food baby there, and it's not breaking down. I've got quite a few patients, that I will be like, so the food sits. Yeah. Does it feel like a food baby? Does it feel like really bloated right under your left side rib cage? Yeah. So I believe that that's part of it. Now, going along the estrogen pathway, we use estradiol, our most useful estrogen, to help strengthen our gut lining. And I think from there, what ends up happening is we digest the foods get in, and now molecules of food are getting across the bloodstream that normally didn't get from the gut lining into the bloodstream. And now we're having immune reactions. And it might mess with our brain a little bit more, I'm convinced. And I'm also convinced that we also have a lot of more inflammation just in general in the body, but also bloat in that local area. And so if we tie it to like cravings, I think what happens ultimately is that our bodies are super intelligent. They know that carbs are easier to digest. And so it calls on carbs to try to get that stuff going. At the same time, our intelligent parts of our brain that know, and our nervous system that know we need protein for our bones. We need it for our muscles. We need it for our energy. We need it for building blocks for all kinds of things. I think we'll have that call for more protein. But the problem is that so many people struggle to digest it in the first place that I think we default back to the carbs. And then, add sugar. You add sugar and now you get the spike and drop and the blood sugar issues on top of it. I mean, we've got kind of a 4-part process going on in the mess.
So do you think for someone who might suspect they have low hydrochloric acid because they have the food baby or they're getting reflux, because also for listeners, and Jannine, you can tell me if this is incorrect, but I think most people actually have not enough stomach acid, even though culturally we've been told you have too much. But when you don't have enough, the protein just kind of sits there and pushes the acid back up. So I know when I was diagnosed with IBS, they were putting me on antacids. And then once I discovered all this stuff, I was like, what am I doing to myself? But I often tell clients to they can experiment with raw apple cider vinegar to see if that helps. Do you agree with that? Or do you think everyone needs to go right up to some digestive enzymes or low dose HCl, hydrochloric acid? If someone wants to, that resonates, right? The food baby, some GERD, heartburn, what are some first couple steps that they can experiment with?
I'm all for dabbling with the apple cider vinegar, lemon, water, things of those natures. But what I will tell you, because I've seen it happen, is enamel does get worn off of the teeth when we're drinking straight. So I'm always like, you got to do a straw. Now, of course, then the big thing is sucking with the straw, we get wrinkles here. So we got to think about these things, right? So that's the only time you want to have a straw in your world, because you don't want to have smoker lip. So thinking that, or get yourself some estriol or estradiol cream and put it on your face. But anyway, side note, yes, I dabble in the lemon, lime, citrus waters. I will dabble in apple cider vinegar. There are some clean companies that have gummies out there now. Granted, there's sugar and all those things, but I have seen, to save the teeth, some of these things do help in that case. But yes, I'd start there. And if that's not strong enough, then there is a hydrochloric acid test that you could do where it's rogue, right? We're taking pills of hydrochloric acid and until you get a burn in your stomach, as long as you have 10 grams of protein in your stomach each time. I could totally send over the PDF on that. But nevertheless, it's a test to see how low is your stomach acid, what is going on. Or the other thing could be H. pylori, the bacteria that can overgrow in the stomach that is very common, very, very common in stressed individuals. And that would be when none of the enzymes are working and when the lemon's not working, when the apple cider's not working. Now you're thinking, oh, I might need to see if there's a little H. pylori and there's breath tests and insurance covered tests to see if that's there.
Well, that's interesting because when I work with my sleep coach, she was a functionally trained nutritionist because H. pylori can contribute to insomnia. And I tested for H. pylori and I took some supplements to help it. And, and it was kind of like I was getting better and better. She got me like 70% better, right? And then HRT kind of got me to 90%. But isn't H. pylori really hard to kill?
It is. And there's a lot of debate as to whether we need to really kill it or just knock it down.
Okay. So it's like crowding it out instead of it being like the dominant. It's kind of like candida. People are like, I got to kill candida. It's like, well, you can't really do that. And you need it. You just don't need it to be like the main bacteria in your gut.
Yes, exactly. And I can't lie that like in the beginning when I was first starting as a doc, I thought, oh yeah, we kill everything down. But like as you look more, you're like, no, wait, we're just regulating. And like mastic gum can be a really easy way to work to knock down H. pylori. But really the truth is on it is like, I'm not going to have people going after it unless you know for sure. Like test, don't guess, because now we're wasting supplements and time.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Test, not guess. Okay. So then you focused on gut health, which I love because estrogen, again, for women, I think sometimes we think, my period ended and there's no like other health effects, but you have estrogen receptors like everywhere, right? Your brain, your heart, everywhere. So your gut microbiome is going to shift. So you mentioned protein. Can you talk a little, or maybe I should step back. What are some of the first couple steps for people to kind of get their gut? Because I did this thing on one of these athletes, I forget his name, but he's like, it was a really inspirational post. He was like, I have asthma, allergies, ADHD, trauma, depression, anxiety, or he didn't say trauma. And, and he still won gold. And I was like, and he's like, you can do anything, right? It was really, and I did the post and I'm like, this is amazing. And it makes me wonder if he has all this, I hope someone's working on his gut. He may be even faster, because like there were like 7 diagnoses. And again, when I had asthma, allergies, IBS, and depression, and I'm not saying your gut health, everything's multifactorial, people. There's no magic bullet, but gut health is super important. And so I'm just wondering, and someone was like, I'm really interested in gut health. And so what are some of the first couple steps as we age that we have to address with gut health that maybe we didn't have to think about, as when we were younger? And, for me, healing my gut from chemo was like, okay, get off processed foods, remove gluten. And then I had to take like a couple digestive enzymes and endorphin, and I was fine. And now it's like, oh my God, people are hawking all these supplements, all this stuff. So what are the foundational first couple steps people could do as we age to support their gut health?
This is going to sound really funny coming out of my mouth, maybe because you would think a naturopath's going to be like, okay, you need all this supplement protocol. But honestly, we need to sit down and eat. Step one. I mean, I'm sure you tell people to do that, but it's cheesy, right? We actually have to sit down and eat. Eating at the kitchen counter or over the kitchen sink is not an acceptable way to eat anymore because your nervous system is not like it's thinking you're running away from a bear and you're shoving food in real quick. So you're not going to optimize how you make your enzymes because we still can make enzymes. We just make a little less as we get older. So the key here is like treating food and meals like you're going out for a French restaurant, like to a fancy French restaurant every single time. Like you literally want to sit down and take your time. Pretend, food costs a lot more now anyway. So anyway, it's expensive. Might as well enjoy it versus shoveling it in. So I have folks sit down, count to 60 before they start eating. And like, no joke, we're chewing our food because you have teeth. That's what they're there for. And when you're younger, you can chew 7 times and swallow and, you're good. But what'll happen, and this is one of the big things that happened to me, it's a genetic thing with my family, is drier foods cause us to choke. They get stuck. And it is part of getting older too, because you're not making as much saliva. Lower estrogen will also have like dried chicken, raw carrots. They can definitely make you choke. So now you got to chew this stuff. And, a lot of people find that they're using more sauces. They're finding putting more sour cream or stuff on things to get it down, especially those mashed potatoes are kind of dry. this is all me. I'm telling you my story too, but I find it from patients too. But you got to sit down and chew. You absolutely have to chew. There are so many like numbers. I usually tell people 20, 25 times, you're going to get it pretty mushed down. If you need more, you need more. And the less teeth you have, the more you got to chew. And this is a real deal thing. A lot of us are having our teeth, different teeth pulled. We're not replacing them. We do need to think about if we've dropped our teeth amount down. My dad has 9 functional teeth and he's 88 years old. So we'll give him some grace there, but man's got to chew like 50 times per bite. So you got to slow down and you got to literally take your time with it. Now, that's kind of the biggest thing that I recommend for diet at this point. Now, in terms of order of food, I do find eating your protein first, moving to your veggies and eating the carbs last does actually feel pretty good in my gut. Other people, it may depend. But here's the thing. If you eat your protein first, it's the hardest thing to digest. Your enzymes are going to hit it first versus waiting to the last. So it is a little nugget that I have found over time to think about. Now, from there, a lot of folks are going to be like, but what about probiotics? What about enzymes? What about colostrum? Do I need all these things? Because all these brands out there are really pushing this hard. Maybe you might, if you can't skip over sitting down and chewing. You can't do that. You have to sit down and chew and eat your food. And I sound like your mother. I mean to. But that's the thing. Mom was right to sit down and chew your food and, and not be distracted doing work. That's another big thing. I was guilty of this for years, multitasking, eating, working. Also, same thing. You really need to think about that now as you get older. Master those things. And if you're still having trouble, that's where you bring in the things like the colostrum for helping your immune system of your gut, bringing in the glutamines and the powders to help the lining. I do think those can be helpful, but I don't think they're first line.
This is why I love you, because we're trying to supplements are supposed to be supplemental, but we've made them the thing. We've made them the foundations because the foundations are harder. I mean, I know sometimes I can be pretty good at like chewing and slowing down at breakfast and dinner, but lunch sometimes, it's like, got a client, I got to do that, And the other day I had a little bit of reflux and I was like, oh, and I was, now us talking, I'm like, because I had to eat really fast. I haven't had reflux since I had IBS, the IBS like 20 years ago. But it was the speed. It was like I was trying to eat in between clients and groups. And it just was like, damn. So it's like we have less margin as we age is what I like. The way that I can think of it is like there's just less room for error. And that isn't a bad thing, because if we're slowing down, that's also going to support our stress and our cortisol and just, I don't know. That's been the thing that I kind of had to kick and scream. And now I'm like, slowing down is amazing. Like there's a lot you miss when you're going so fast. But I love those steps. That's going to be really helpful. I've always, because I've always had sensitive blood sugar, always eat my protein first. But now it's going to be even more intentional because you said, do that. Like you'll have the most digestive power. And now that makes sense of why you want to rest and relax and turn on that part of your nervous system so that your enzymes are more online than not. So that's huge. I love those beginning steps for the gut health. So thank you. So the other process I want to talk about, and I think about how this aging contributes to food struggles in terms of, we talked about carbs and sugar, but kind of this runaway train that can be insulin resistance. That's part of satiety and it's part of cravings. And it's something that the good news is no matter what age you are, things can get better. And though it is something that isn't like, I'm trying to describe it. It isn't, it's cumulative. It's like exponential. I found, like, for example, with me, like, I didn't realize how I was eating. I wasn't strength training because I had a newborn, and that contributed to insomnia, which then made me more tired to want to cook meals, right? Then it was like, okay, I'm eating cashews for dinner, right? Which was like, oh no, like, so it's this like vicious cycle that isn't, I'm trying to find the words for insulin sensitivity. Like it's a snowball going down the hill rather than like, oh, I can just fix it. Will you talk about insulin sensitivity and insulin resistance and how that especially as we age becomes something else we really need to pay attention to, and how you approach it in your practice?
Yeah, it is a snowball going down a very steep hill, and it does snowball. And I think a lot of people overlook a couple of the vices that can lead to it. As women, we're known to skip meals. We'll eat breakfast, we'll skip lunch, and then at dinner time, we wonder why we turn into mama bear and we're like hunting through the kitchen and eating like 3-year-old chocolate we found in the back of the cabinet that tastes like cardboard. We wonder why this happens to us. Well, we have patterns, and you really do need to look at your patterns, because you're going to be like, oh, okay, there it is. Because insulin resistance just doesn't come out of magically nowhere. Like, yes, you can be stressed and it can potentiate the situation. But there are a lot of women right now who are eating one meal a day. And they're like, why do I have insulin resistance? I have multiple patients in my practice where they're like, yeah, I eat like, and what they tell me is like food for birds, right? I'm like, wow, I think, my crow outside probably ate more than you today, and it's little amounts of food. But what's happening, like going back to what I was saying before, is we've got this glycogen released from the muscles going back and down into your bloodstream. And so your liver's freaking confused. It doesn't know what it's supposed to signal. It doesn't know what it's supposed to do. So the default is to basically signal the pancreas to keep kicking out insulin to counter the sugar that keeps coming out of the liver and the muscles. And then what ends up happening with that, right? We end up having a struggle. So with insulin resistance, fasting to a point can help. Now, I said earlier, the lumen can help quite a bit if you're really struggling in this case and you need like a little tidbit just to know what's going on. But you can do this on your own too. You don't have to get fancy with technology. And what you're looking at is like between dinner and breakfast, how long does it take you? What's your usual average time? I try to have folks do at least 12 hours just on a habit, because it gives the cells at least time to rest. And for most women, we've found kind of through research that between 12 and 14, 16 on the high end of fasting is tolerable. But when we start doing a lot more than that, it gets to be a problem, because now we're confusing our muscles, our liver, and our pancreas communication. So I do think that everyone should have a test for insulin resistance. You can test fasting insulin, or you can test with something called a lipofractionation study. It's LabCorp has it. And so does Quest. They have they call it cardiometabolic with the Quest, and you get an insulin resistance score. So like how severe is this situation? And the other side of the situation is going back to the gut microbiome, because your gut microbiome has a lot to do with insulin resistance in terms of the microbes that are in your gut. If you have more yeast in your gut, you're going to tend to be more possibly insulin resistant. So you do want to know what's going on with the microbes. Like, yeah, there's Viome, there's GI map. I'm a fan of at least testing just to get an idea. There's a lot of like, you could argue the daylights out of validity and things of that nature, but you can get a sense of what's going on in your gut there. And I do like to know kind of what someone's microbiome profile looks like. Now, the other side of weird connection with insulin resistance is parasites too. There can be some funky stuff in that department. And it all literally leads back to leaky gut, food getting across the lining that shouldn't be there, microbes not breaking down food like they should, backs up into the liver gets backed up. Now we got fatty liver. It's like I mentioned earlier, like it's one of the most common things I see in women that are at the more often mid to late 40s and beyond, where the insulin resistance has gone that far. So what do I typically do about it? I am making sure that there's a 12 to 14 hour fast no matter what, and that we have protein heavily in the diet, to the point where a lot of people will look at me and be like, you're batty. And it's like, equal your weight, grams of protein. Now, if we're looking at someone who's over, 150 pounds, yes, that gets very difficult and expensive. And so we grade it at certain points, but we got to have the consistent protein. We got to start the day off with protein. And back to the enzymes in that kind of situation, we want to literally, that is the first thing you put in your mouth to optimize the amount of enzymes coming out of your body. So that's how I do it. And definitely timing between food, making sure you're not going over like 4 or 5 hours. And I'm kind of like a 3 meal a day person, sometimes 4, depending on the person. I'm not at this every 2 hours. That's going to create massive insulin resistance there. Snacking, grazing, that's another biggie too, is grazing can be a huge issue for insulin resistance.
I'm glad you brought that in, because I know that the food companies have targeted certain anti-diet influencers to now say snacking's okay and eat my sugary stuff, so it's getting weird out there. I know. NPR did a whole article and I was like, damn, I didn't see that one coming. So a couple things that I want to back up though, because we talked about like kind of the sequence over strategy earlier. And you're saying fasting, because I'm glad you brought that up. I wrote down like, oh, we're circle back to fasting because people hear all different things. So just to clarify, you're saying 12 hours, which for most people is overnight, right? It's like you don't, yeah, so you're saying what you've seen in your practice, 12 to 16 hours at most. Now, some people, now we were talking, but that sounds like, and again, maybe I'm biased because I also am like parasympathetic dominant. I need 3 meals a day. I can't, but overnight. But if people are feeling insulin resistant, is fasting going to be a stress on their system? Do they have to get some other ducks in a row before they can perhaps go overnight? Because again, I don't want to make this interview all about me, but just to use a concrete example is, so I was clearly, I don't know if it mattered, but I was clearly in the late stages of menopause when I was pregnant. And I didn't want to take the drink that they make you drink, to get, so I pricked my fingers and my numbers after my meals were beautiful. But overnight, I would wake up with high fasting glucose. And the dietitian at the hospital was like, eat a snack before bed. I normalized it, and it was like, okay, you're fine now. So I was bottoming out overnight. I couldn't hold it. And then when I worked with my sleep coach, I had to do a snack for a while before bed because I couldn't carry myself overnight. So I'm just wondering if someone is like in the process of, obviously I had a lot of work to do and I'm healing and now I can pretty much get away with not eating a snack. I don't eat a snack before bed now that I think about it anymore. But like, that's an example of like my insulin sensitivity needed some improvement, or maybe there's a parasite that's waking me up hungry. I don't know. But what would you say to someone who's like, oh my God, I'm not even fasting and I'm not even eating enough protein yet. Like, how would you like, and I know it depends on the person, which is why I love how you operate. But any guidelines for people thinking of like, should I start fasting now?
Yeah, I want people to not think about the traditional fasting, like what's in the books, what's in all that stuff. What I'm talking about more than anything is to do this right, you've got to get your blood sugar balance first in the morning, right? You got to start in the beginning of the day. Your breakfast or your first meal is your most important blood sugar balancing meal. People will say your most important meal. I'm going to say it's your most important blood sugar balancing meal because it sets the tone for the rest of the day. I was taught in school, and I've never been able to find data to back this up, but I find it to be true. And I've been challenged on it by folks. And I'm like, yeah, I just can't find the data, but I know it's true in terms of empirical, in terms of seeing patients. And what it is making sure that first meal, start your day off with protein. And for a lot of people, if you're having to have a snack at night or you're waking up in the middle of the night to have to eat, that coffee you have, if you're drinking coffee or some form of caffeine in the morning, could be jacking with you. You might want to think about the protein first, then the coffee as you've started to eat.
Do that.
Yeah.
So I can still keep my coffee because I always I never eat coffee on an empty stomach.
Yeah. That's essentially it. Like not the coffee on an empty stomach because coffee's caffeine, right? It's going to put your blood sugar up and your blood sugar's already up in the morning because cortisol's up to wake you up. And so if you wake up and boom, you have your coffee and that's what you're doing, well, you're making your blood sugar already go up. So you're already setting yourself off on a roller coaster. So yeah, I'm always like protein, then start sipping on your coffee. You got to do it that way because otherwise you're not helping yourself at all. And fasting with drinking coffee, this whole like dirty fast, or I'm like, what, you didn't take a shower? Like all these terms, I'm like, oh my God, I don't know what this means. But like the dirty fast and all that stuff, like just throw it out. Just throw it out. Point is, you need the protein in the morning and you got to sit down, you got to chew it. Yes. And if you're arguing with me right now, well, I really suck at digesting protein. Yeah, it's because you got to sit down and eat and chew, and maybe you need some enzymes or, some intervention like the apple cider vinegar if you really struggle. But your first meal of the day sets the tone. Your pancreas looks at that first meal of the day and it goes, oh, okay, this is what, Allie's going to do. This is the thing. And so then the next meal, it's preparing like the one you just had. So, and this is the data that I was mentioning that I cannot seem to find the backup on this, but follows suit in terms of watching what I've seen with the lumen, watching what I've seen with folks finger poking themselves while pregnant, all of these different things. And the folks that use the CGM, so the continuous glucose monitors, we see this to be true. Your blood sugar will be based on the first meal of the day. So if you want to stop having a snack at night to get you through and you want to, you got to work on the beginning of things. And yes, like Ali said, it's not going to be like, it's just going to switch. There's a adjustment period to the point where you'll find like you just don't need the snack anymore once you're getting things balanced there.
So for everyone listening, right, like fasting doesn't it have to be the first thing. Get your blood sugar in line, which will then, I know in my work, in Truths with Food, and I always start with blood sugar because I feel like people can make the connections of like, one client was like, oh my God, I don't care about donuts once I start with protein. It's like, exactly. So it's more immediate and more like relieving, whereas gut health feels like it takes a little bit longer. But just for people like, everything in your body, at least in my view, and you can tell me what your thoughts are, like comes, whether we're talking hormones, sleep, all of the symptoms that we're struggling with, come down to your gut health and your blood sugar. And I think of them as like the double helix DNA. Like they talk to each other via inflammation, right? Like that's how they are joined, but you need to work on both of those. So get those foundations, which Dr. Krause has told us the foundational things to get started with blood sugar and gut health. So start there before you think you have to tweak and iterate and do all these biohacks. It's like optimization can only happen if these foundational things that we're talking about are first. I did want to circle back because like you were saying, like if you're over 150 pounds, I think what you were saying is the guidelines right now are like 1 gram of protein and that can get expensive per pound. But what you weigh can get expensive. What are your thoughts on, I always love asking people their thoughts on protein recommendations because again, nature's kind of my spirituality framework, sustainability. It feels unsustainable for the planet for all of us to be getting, some of these recommendations. So what are your thoughts on, which doesn't mean that's not true, right? I mean, maybe there's things I haven't thought of, but what are your thoughts on 1 pound, 1 gram equals 1 pound? That's the recommendation. Do you agree with that? Do you think there's wiggle room there if you're trying to build muscle versus maintain? Thoughts on protein amounts for people?
There's definitely wiggle room. And if you're lifting weights and you're trying to build muscle, you do have to have more protein. There's no way around it. There really isn't. And sustainability, well, that's a whole nother podcast in that department. Protein powders, a lot of people will think about using them as an alternative. The issue with those is, well, how do you think they extracted the protein from whatever it is that they're using, whether it's whey, pea, egg, white, etc. I mean, there's a process. It's chemical. It's processed. And I'm not saying that it's terrible in a pinch, but we do want to be thinking about how can we get whole foods closer to nature protein sources. And, a lot of people ask me too, like, can you be vegan and get enough protein? Yeah, if you want to eat all day and you have the time to work in the kitchen, yeah, like go for it. If you have a personal chef, you can do it. It's not easy. And if you're committed, like I've seen people do it, but it's a lot of food and you got to have a really solid gut to do it. So, where I'm going with this is like sustainability, fish sources. We have a lot of good data on what fish are not overfished. You can look at the Monterey Bay Seafood Watch, I believe is what it's called. In California, you can see kind of what's sustainable, what doesn't have a lot of mercury, those kind of things. Fish are easy, less carbon footprint, than beef and things of that nature. So thinking about that as a whole. Now, overall with protein and where do I stand on this? I think that we have to ease ourselves into eating protein in the first place. Telling someone like, oh, hey, let's look at your protein. Oh, you're eating 40 grams of protein a day and now I want you to eat 150. I mean, that's such an overwhelming amount to jump up. Like, oh my God, that's awful. But I have seen over and over again in patients that I work with, the higher amounts of protein that we can get on them and tolerate, the gut can tolerate, they're not getting constipated or they're not having diarrhea on the other end, there's no acid reflux. We find what's comfortable. And a lot of times it does come up to being very close to their body weight in grams. Now, when someone, and this is why I'm saying 150, when someone weighs 200, 300 pounds, there's no freaking way your body needs that much. I mean, you're going to kill your kidneys trying to eat that much protein. So, I got to meet people where they're at, but I also really have to see like, when is weight coming down or when is someone feeling good in their belly, right? Like, when do you feel good? You're not gassy, you're not bloated, you're not having gut distress. That's your sweet spot, not, the standard recommendation in that case.
You're so bio-individual, which is ultimately the truth. We put ourselves into these like bell curves, but no one has like a bell curve health experience. So I think that's really important because a lot of my clients are perfectionists and they think like, oh, I got to get up to there right away. So I love that you say ease into it, get your system used to digesting that much, see if you can even digest that much. And then I also read, because again, when I was trying to lose weight these past couple of years and do it in a healthy, sustainable way, I was toggling of like what my pre-pregnancy weight was. And so for people who do have some weight to lose, wouldn't you say like targeting from, I don't even want to say your goal weight because there's some weight that's healthy to gain as we age. We can talk about that. But should people peg it to like what they weigh now? Or I hate to say what they want to weigh because we're also not realistic often with what's actually healthy. It's like some padding as you age is okay and even healthy. Fat puts off estradiol, right? So it's like it helps bring up some of that loss of estrogen that we're losing with menopause. But it's so triggering and can be interpreted in many ways when I say like, do you peg it to what you want to weigh?
I try not to when I'm talking with those, I'm always going to say that the 1 gram per body weight is what you're going to hear, right? And for a lot of people, if you're lifting weights, you're trying to improve body composition, you do have to have a higher amount of protein. It just is the way it is if you want to put on muscle and maintain it. So what I do is typically I'm going to start with how much protein are you actually eating right now? Just to see, because if, like I said, if someone's eating 40 grams of protein and say they weigh 300 pounds and they want to lose weight, great. Okay. How can we up that slowly each meal to the point where they feel good? And so most of the time, I'm not going to even give a number. I'll give a ballpark that I'm like, yeah, maybe we shoot for 100, but because 40 to 100 is a huge jump, I'm probably going to be more like 75, but I will say, let's shoot for this. I don't tie it to the weight. I'm tying it more to like, let's try to just make sure you get in a certain amount of protein per meal. So your target, a lot of times my blanket target might be about 25 grams per meal. That's going to be very often, if you ask my patients, that's going to be very often where I start things at. And then from there, we tweak up or down based on where things are going. So yeah, we just want to think about like a target per meal and that you feel full. We're also having to think about like, are you full? Did it fill you up or are you still wanting donuts?
Yeah.
We have to think about that.
And I was thinking, and I'm glad you brought up animal protein. Yeah, that's a whole other conversation because local, like small farms are totally part of the sustainability. I'm not one of these like meat is automatically unsustainable people. It's like, no, there's a lot going on right now. But I don't know that one of my clients, we were talking about breakfast and she was like, I was thinking like protein was only animal meat and she eats animal meat, but like for her cottage cheese in the morning, was like that kind of protein was like where she started and has been really helpful for her. So for people listening, lunch and dinner often, I'm always eating animal protein. I have to eat it at every meal to feel satisfied, but some people can do cottage cheese or yogurt in the morning. So don't forget about those as well. Just wanted to plug that for protein. All right. So one last question I want to ask you, because I think this is another huge thing related to food as we age in our bodies. And I want to talk about recovery in terms of stress. I love how on your Instagram, you promote like strength training and all this stuff. But again, in the same way that we're all brainwashed from the 80s and 90s, exercise has been viewed as punishment. Or even if you want to lose weight, it's like, okay, cut calories modestly for 3 months and then go back to your resting metabolic rate. Like you need recovery from calorie deficit so that your body doesn't adapt to the calorie deficit. Or I even think about stress. And in my Why Am I Doing This Now program, it's like we're constantly working on the triggers that make people tend to be so stressed and make them realize like, oh my God, I actually need recovery when I'm tired rather than just going. I have to slow down. So can you just speak to this concept of recovery? Because with those examples, recovery was never something that we were taught to value in 80s and 90s diet culture or capitalism. So can you speak to how important recovery is as we age so that we aren't so burnt out that we're then turning to carbs to power us through, or we aren't feeling so much of that cortisol, tired but wired, that we're like, I deserve to eat this, rather than just giving ourselves recovery to snowboard or ski. Or I sometimes tell my clients, like after I drop my son off of daycare, I come home, put my legs up the wall and just stare at the ceiling. Like that's part of my recovery, especially after the weekend. So can you just speak to recovery and what that concept means to you and how you implement that with your clients?
Sure. Recovery really, I'm going to talk on more of an energetic level and I'll make it make sense here. It's not going to sound so woo because I've had to really convince myself of this as well. Recovery to me is really recharging the nervous system. And in the Chinese medicine principles, we have the kidneys as being our batteries. And if they're charged up, we've got a good energy base, we can keep going. Well, the adrenal glands sit on top of the kidneys. So I think of it as, we're keeping ourselves charged. And part of the charge really goes back to sodium, potassium, chloride, like the electrolytes. We blow through those when we're stressed, and the adrenal glands are what regulate those. So if we look at recharge recovery, I'm always talking about it in terms of the ions that we have in the body, because we use these positive, negative charges that are in our electrolytes to signal. So sodium, potassium gates, there's voltage gated channels for your nervous system. These gates help move things across cell walls and not cell walls, but cell linings and things of that nature. We have this happening all day long in our body. So to recharge means to help get those ions back up. And you laying down and putting your legs up the wall, I have a similar thing I'll do after I'm done working out to stop the cortisol pump. And what it is it's called positional parasympathetic breathing. One of my fitness coaches, Dr. John Russin, taught me this. And he's like, literally 5 minutes at the end of every workout, you tell your body that this stress is over. And so what you're telling yourself is this stress of the morning and getting my son out the door is over. And this tells your body, let's stop the cortisol pump, because we all know that workouts are good cortisol pumps. But if we go from the workout and then we just go straight into life, like we go take our shower, we go run the rest of our hurried day, we're going to keep that cortisol up more than we want to. So to recharge really means to me to stop the cortisol pump and help the body bring the electrolytes back into balance. And so by breathing and just relaxing, like you could do fancier breathing. You could breathe in and out your nose. You could help with a little nitric oxide production if you want to by breathing in and out of the nose and help with circulation. But really, it's slowing down for 5 minutes. Lay down, put your legs up. That helps. If you can't lay down and put your legs up, you're sitting down and you put your palms up like so. This is called a receiving mode. You put your palms up and you just let them sit on your thighs, and you're just relaxing with the breath and hanging out there for a couple minutes. That goes so far for your nervous system, because your nervous system, if you just keep going, and you don't stop at all during the day, your body thinks the bear's chasing you. And at the end of the day, you feel like you ran a marathon because, well, to your nervous system, you did, away from whatever imaginary bear there is. So you can recharge yourself throughout the day by taking a moment to slow down, get away from the screens, get away from your phone, get outside. I'm very big on get outside.
Nature will do the work for you.
Yeah. Kick your shoes off, go walk in your grass if it suits you for that day. Obviously if there's 4 feet of snow on the ground, it's probably not a smart idea, but you could get outside, put your boots on and gloves. just getting outside for a couple minutes a day without any of your technology can be a game changer. And so my recovery recommendations, I could get fancy with all kinds of supplements and things, but honest to goodness, the truth is taking breaks. And think of it as recharging the battery, because your adrenals will recharge themselves the more breaks you can take during the day, and stop the cortisol constant pump. If you get stressed out, do a reset. One of the other things that I love that I've been learning a lot is like different resets. Like this is havening and ice, like arm skating like this, doing these like 5-second resets. And I'm saying 5 seconds, they could be like a minute, 30 seconds, like those kind of things. And just getting yourself back in your body. You can trace your lips with your finger for like 6 times. You can do this is called teeth cleaning with the tongue. You can do that 6 times. And these are just little nervous system resets. Like if someone says something and ticks you off and you're like, God, I gotta let this go, do that. If you're just feeling agitated, amped, you have no idea, a little anxious, do that. If you can't lay down. So I've literally trained myself and a lot of my clients to spend their day taking little breaks like that. And those little resets there that I just talked about, this is all from Kate Northrup. She has a lot of this in some of her classes. And really what it is just connecting back to your body, feeling your hands in your hand in your hand. And you're just doing this for like 60 seconds and you're just chilling. It's a reset. Yeah. And then you just like shake it out and you're done. Move on to the next thing. If you have to feel an emotion, do it, that kind of thing with that process. So yeah, that's recharging. That's recovery for me.
Yeah, I think that's so important because for people listening, often we think resilience is just pounding away at doing the hard thing, but we know from research that recovery is essential to resilience, and midlife and aging is not for the faint of heart. So you got to pace yourself with breaks. Thank you so much, Jannine. Dr. Krause, is there anything that I didn't ask you or that you want to share that I didn't think to ask you?
The biggest thing for folks to really think about is that you are in control of your health, and you have the choices. You can make all these choices to help yourself. And there are so many folks like Allie out there, myself, other functional medicine docs and practitioners that are here to help you regain your control.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And we'll have all your links and everything. And you had mentioned that PDF. Could we include that in the show notes for the stomach acid test?
Yeah. I'll create a link for that for you guys so that you can see how to test your stomach acid in a very fun way with betaine hydrochloric.
Thank you so much, Jannine. I hope you enjoyed today's show. And if you're feeling those back to school vibes to work on your relationship to food and falling off track, I hope you'll join me for my free masterclass this upcoming September 10th. That's a Tuesday. The masterclass is called Untangle Your Food Triggers. Catch yourself before you fall off track. It's going to be good. And it is also a free sneak peek of my upcoming group program, Why Am I Eating This Now?, which opens for registration on September 9th. You can register by clicking the link in the show notes or visit my website at allyshapiro.com.